This is Miss Leffler, and today we're going to do lesson 51 in pre-algebra, which is decimal part of a number. And so back in lesson 48 we talked about fractional parts. Decimals are basically the same thing as fractions, just expressed in a different way. So what decimal part of 240 is 90? So just like we did in lesson 48, we're going to start by translating these words into an algebraic equation. So what decimal part? Anytime you see what decimal or what fraction or what number, you can replace it with a variable. So I replace it with x. And then I also know that the word of means times. So the next thing I wrote was a multiplication symbol. And then of 240 means times 240. And then if I see is, I know that's an equal sign. So that equals 90. So I made this equation and now I just have to solve it. So we learned that when you want to solve for x, and its x is being multiplied by something, we have to undo the multiplication by dividing both sides by that number. So I'm going to divide both sides by 240. So 240 over 240 is 1. So I just have 1x, or just x. So now I need to calculate 90 divided by 240. So I'm going to have to do some long division. So go ahead and pause the video and take a moment to do that long division to get the decimal number. And so if you divided correctly, you should have got 0.375. So x equals 0.375. And answering the original question, what decimal part of 240 is 90, we could say that 0.375 of 240 is 90. So answering the original question would look like that. Let's do another example. Next example is 4/10 of what number is 72? And since we're talking about decimals, when we see 4/10, you might want to write 4/10 as a fraction. It doesn't really matter, but since this lesson is about decimals, let's write it as a decimal number, which means it would be 0.4, because this is the tenths place. And then of means times, so we multiply. What number means x, is means equal sign, and 72. So now, similar to the last example, I have to get the x by itself, and I can do that by undoing the multiplication, dividing both sides by 0.4. So now we have some more long division. We have to do 72 divided by 0.4. And before we start that, just a reminder, when you're dividing decimal numbers, a good way to do it is to make the number you're dividing by, make it into a whole number by moving the decimal over 1. And if you do that, you also have to move the decimal over 1 for the other number. So now I have only whole numbers. So I'm really just dividing the number 720 by 4. And that makes it a lot easier than trying to divide with decimals. So go ahead and pause the video and figure it out. So if you divided this correctly, you should have got 180. So 4/10 of what number would be 0.4 of what number of 180 is 72. So answering the original question, 0.4 of 180 is 72. Let's do a couple more examples. These ones you can do on your own. So flipping over your notes, we can look at this next question. What decimal part of 72 is 30.24? So take a moment, pause the video, and first translate this into an equation, and then solve that equation. So if you solve this correctly, then you would set up the equation like this. X times 72 equals 30.24. Then you divide both sides by 72. Again, I had to do some long division here, dividing 30.24 by 72. Using long division, I figured out that it was 0.42. So that's my answer. 0.42 of 72 is 30.24. Let's do one last example. 7/100 of 86 is what number? And remember, 7/100 could be written as a fraction, 7 over 100, but we're working with decimals, so I prefer that you write it as a decimal, which is 0.07. So go ahead and pause the video, set up the equation, and see if you can figure it out. So checking the answer for this, setting up the equation, I did 7/100 of 86, which means times 86 equals x. And so this time I don't have to do anything to solve for x. X is already by itself. I just have to simplify by multiplying 86 times 0.07, which I did. Remembering the decimal rule, I had to move the decimal over 2 places, and I got 6.02, or 6 2/100. And so answering the original question, 7/100 of 86 is 6.02.